What's going on, guys? It's Jack Gills 1875 here, and today I thought I'd do something a bit different on the channel. I thought I'd go through the Bundesliga table and look at the last time each Bundesliga club won silverware. So it's going to be an interesting one. There's a few that haven't won silverware in quite a while. So before we jump into the video, I'll explain the rules for it. Where I can, it's going to be major pieces of silverware that are counted, so no Bundesliga 2 titles, no Liga Pokals, no Super Cups, that sort of thing. But in some clubs' cases, they've never won a major piece of silverware, so in that case, I will take into account stuff like Bundesliga 2 titles, so I get that out of the way. So it's going to be an interesting video. Going to go through each club, explain what that piece of silverware was, when they won it, and how they won it. I hope you enjoy the video, guys. So we start off at the top of the table with Bayer Leverkusen. The last time they won something was the Pokal in 1993. It was a pretty impressive run to the Pokal final, and they beat a very unusual opponent 1-0. It was, of course, Hertha Berlin's reserve team, back when reserve teams were still allowed to play in the competition. Bayer Leverkusen beat them 1-0. To be honest, from what I was reading in the stats, it could have been a lot more from the match report. And it's actually Bayer Leverkusen's only major piece of domestic silverware within Germany. They did win the UEFA Cup in 1988, but apart from that, they've never won anything major, only one Pokal to their name, and that was that in 1993. Well, the 90s was a very, very good decade for Bayer Leverkusen, and they seem to be having a bit of a resurgence right now as well. So there we go. Moving on to Bayern Munich next. We now move on to Bayern Munich, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that we only have to go back to the summer this year to find Bayern's last piece of major silverware. It was, of course, the Champions League 1-0 win over PSG in the final in Lisbon. It was, of course, delayed due to COVID, but a very impressive run in the 2019-20 Champions League from Bayern Munich. They sealed their 6th Champions League title that night and a treble as well. Of course, they won the Bundesliga and the Pokal. Wasn't a surprise. Bayern absolutely dominated European football last season, and they very much deserved to. Very impressive team, and that's coming out of a Hertha fan. So there you go. The last time Bayern Munich won a major piece of silverware was the Champions League 2020. We now move on to RB Leipzig. And the last time RB Leipzig won something was the Saxony Cup in 2013. Yep, RB Leipzig haven't even won as much as a Bundesliga 2 title. They've only ever really won amateur competitions. Of course, the regional cups qualify the amateur teams for the DFB Pokal first round. Now, RB Leipzig, granted, were in their infancy at this time. They just got promoted into the 3 Liga from the Regionalliga Nordost. They beat Chemnitzer 4-2 in the final at the Red Bull Arena, and that is that. RB Leipzig have only ever won 2 Saxony Cups and the Regionalliga Nordost. They've never won the 3 Liga, they've never won the Bundesliga 2, never won the Pokal. Now, of course, as the experiment goes on, I expect they probably will win major pieces of silverware, but they haven't as of yet, and the last thing they won was the Saxony Pokal in 2013. Like I said, beating Chemnitzer FC 4-2 in that final. We now move on to Wolfsburg. And the last time Wolfsburg won a major piece of silverware was the DFB Pokal in 2015. It was a very impressive Wolfsburg side that year. A certain Kevin De Bruyne played for them back then, and it was a pretty convincing victory in the final. They beat Dortmund 3-1, despite going 1-0 down. Aubameyang scored in the 5th minute, and Wolfsburg replied with 3 and won the game. Very, very impressive Wolfsburg side, like I was saying, and they deserved to win that Pokal. Many people felt like it was probably Dortmund's year, but it wasn't. Wolfsburg were a really impressive side, and like I said, players like De Bruyne and other players in that team have went on to bigger and better things, and it's one of only 2 pieces of domestic silverware, major domestic silverware, Wolfsburg have ever won. Of course, they won their first Bundesliga in 2009 as well, but the Pokal was more recently. That's why that was in this video. We now move on to Borussia Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund, of course, one of Germany's biggest clubs. Last major piece of silverware for them was the 2017 DFB Pokal. They beat Eintracht Frankfurt 2-1 in the final with goals from Ousmane Dembele and Aubameyang. It was a very impressive Dortmund team that year, of course. 2 years after Klopp left, they had Thomas Tuchel as the manager, the current PSG coach. It was a very impressive Dortmund team. They won the Pokal, they deserved it. It was a bit cruel on Frankfurt. They'd had a good run in the Cup as well, but as we're about to discover later on in the video, they got their just reward. But Dortmund were a very impressive side. They still had a lot of their good players, and they sealed the Cup, which I think was only right that they did. They've never won any major pieces of silverware since, and Dortmund have went into a bit of a slump. They now find themselves managerless and 5th in the league. We now move on to Union Berlin. We now move on to Union Berlin, and we have to go back to 1968 and another country to find their last piece of major silverware. They won the East German Cup, the FDGB Pokal, in 1968, beating Karlsruhe 2-1 in the final, which was a bit of a shock given that Union were never really a massive team in East Germany, and they're enjoying the most successful period in their club's history right now. So they beat Karlsruhe, who are one of the big East German clubs, 2-1 in the final. They've never won any other major pieces of silverware apart from that. They've only ever won the East German lower leagues, and in a United Germany they've not really done much either. So there you go, the 1968 FDGB Pokal in East Germany. We now move on to VfB Stuttgart. Now move on to VfB Stuttgart, and the last piece of major silverware they won was in 2007, and it was the Bundesliga title. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will be surprised that VfB Stuttgart have won the Bundesliga that recently. You don't really associate Stuttgart with silverware, a lot of people, but they are one of Germany's biggest clubs, and in the 13 years since, they have sort of gained a bit of a yo-yo club reputation. But yep, 2007, Stuttgart won the league. Very, very impressive side. They were pretty comfortable in the league for most of the season, and they deserved to win it. I've got to say, it was a bit of a shock at the time. Not as much of a shock as it would be now, but it was quite a bit of a shock at the time, and like I said, they did thoroughly deserve to win it. A very impressive team, and one that will probably go down in Stuttgart history considering the sort of position they're in now. We now move on to Borussia Mönchengladbach. We now move on to Borussia Mönchengladbach. Their last piece of major silverware came in 1995 when they won the DFB Pokal, beating Wolfsburg 3-0 in the final. And in the 90s, Borussia Mönchengladbach were one of Germany's top teams. Now, in the 21st century, and especially in the last sort of 10 years, they've not been the side that they used to be. In the 90s and the 70s, they were a big, and in the 80s as well, were a big dominant side within Germany. And that 1995 Pokal has been their last ever major piece of silverware. They've won the Bundesliga 2 title in 2008, but apart from that, they just don't really do much, Mönchengladbach. It was an impressive year for them, that 1995 run, and they really did deserve to win that Pokal. The Wolfsburg side they were playing at that time was very weak, because Wolfsburg weren't a big club back then. They weren't the size of club they were now back then, so got to say it wasn't a shock that Mönchengladbach won it. We now move on to Eintracht Frankfurt. We move on to Eintracht Frankfurt. Their last piece of major silverware came in 2018 when they won the DFB Pokal, beating Bayern 3-1 in the final. Now, we were talking about earlier in the video, the year before they lost to Dortmund 2-1. Eintracht Frankfurt came back with a vengeance. Of course, that great team managed by Kovac, with loads of great players, Rebic, Jovic. That was the Eintracht Frankfurt team that was lighting up the Bundesliga and really impressing not just Germany but the whole of Europe. Really, really impressive side. They got what they deserved in the final. A nice wee 3-1 win over Bayern, which people were really shocked at. I mean, everybody was expecting Bayern to steamroller them. Eintracht Frankfurt showed up for the occasion. They went in there, they showed Bayern what they were all about and won the Pokal. Then the season after, they went on to the Europa League semi-final. Very impressive run in the Europa League, but Eintracht have sadly hit a bit of a slump, and I don't think they'll be recapturing the heady heights of that season anytime soon. So there we go. We now move on to Augsburg. And it probably doesn't come as a surprise that Augsburg have never won a major piece of silverware. Their last silverware came in 2005, and that was the now defunct Schwaben Cup, which was a regional cup within Schwaben, which is within Bavaria. So I'm really sorry, guys, but I couldn't find any information or any pictures of this. So we're literally going to have to say they won it, and that's that. I do apologise, but no information is better than false information. I don't want to get the wrong thing or the wrong end of the stick. So there we go. They won the Schwaben Cup in 2005, and that is that. I really do apologise about that. We now move on to Hertha. Berlin, and for Hertha's last piece of major silverware, we have to go all the way back to 1931 when they won the German National Championship. So the German National Championship was what the Bundesliga replaced. It was the old system, so you play in your regionalised league. The winners of those would then go into a playoff-like system, and the winner of that would be the champions of Germany. So it's a bit like the MLS. Hertha beat 1860 Munich. I couldn't actually find the scoreline, but they beat 1860 Munich in the final to claim the German national championship. That was Hertha's second in a row. They'd won it the year before as well. And that is the last piece of major silverware Hertha have ever won, which is quite bad considering A, Hertha are a big club in terms of stature and reputation, and B, they're from the country's capital. But there you go. That's that. That's the last time Hertha won a major piece of silverware, the German Championship in 1931. We now move on to Hoffenheim. Their last piece of silverware came in 2005, and it wasn't a major piece of silverware. It was the Baden-Württemberg Regional Cup. They beat something called Heidelberg Kirchenheim 6-0 in the final. Now, Hoffenheim have never won a major piece of silverware because they are a bit like RB Leipzig. Now, Hoffenheim are an old club, but they used to be an amateur club, and for a lot of their history, they were in the sort of 5th, 6th division until a certain Mr. Dietmar Hopp came along, ploughed loads of money into them, and took them up to the Bundesliga. Now, when they won this Baden-Württemberg Pokal, they had just been promoted to the Bundesliga 2. They just won the old Oberliga back then. Now, this was before the 3-Liga was instated, so 3rd division football was still regional. They won the old Baden-Württemberg Oberliga and got promoted to the Bundesliga 2. So that's the last bit of silverware Hoffenheim have won. Now, I've got to apologise, but I couldn't find any pictures, so I just put in a random picture from that season instead. We now move on to Werder Bremen. And their last piece of major silverware came in 2009 when they won the DFB Pokal. They beat Bayer Leverkusen 1-0 in the final. A certain Mesut Ozil scored the winning goal for Werder Bremen. And back then, Werder Bremen in the early 2000s were a very impressive team. They are one of the bigger teams if you look at German football historically. Now, of course, in the recent years have not been decent at all, and especially last season and looking like this season as well, they've found themselves lower half of the table. But back in 2009, they were a very impressive side. They'd done a really good, promising, strong league showing, got to the final against a very good Bayer Leverkusen team. Ozil got them the goal, they got the 1-0 win, it was thoroughly deserved, and that was that. They lifted the DFB Pokal. Like I said, Werder ever since then haven't exactly been in the best form. They haven't really lived up to their historical reputation, and they haven't won anything since. So there you go, the 2009 DFB Pokal. We're now going to move on to SC Freiburg. And their last piece of silverware came in 2016. Now, Freiburg, another club in this video that haven't won a major piece of silverware. So 2016 was the last piece of silverware when they lifted the Bundesliga 2 title. They had an impressive season. Christian Streich, who's still their head coach to this day, got them up into the Bundesliga. Very impressive run in the Bundesliga 2. They always looked like they were the team to win it. Usually the Bundesliga 2 is quite tight, but Freiburg strolled their way to the Bundesliga 2 title that season. And yeah, very impressive Freiburg side that year, and ever since they've stayed up in the Bundesliga. And you never know, a Pokal or a Bundesliga could be somewhere in the pipeline. You never do know. They could do a Leicester, they could do a Wigan, you never do know. So there we go. That's the last time Freiburg won a piece of silverware. We now move on to Köln. 1st FC Köln. Their last piece of major silverware came in 1983 when they won the DFB Pokal, beating city rivals Fortuna Köln in the final. So this was a weird final. It wasn't played in West Berlin like it usually would have been. It was played in Cologne. It was an all-Cologne affair in the final, like I said, and then 1st FC Köln beat Fortuna Köln 1-0 in a tightly contested Cologne derby, and it's the only time a Cologne derby has ever been played in the DFB Pokal final. So there's that little fact for you. Now, Köln are one of Germany's biggest teams. They were the first ever Bundesliga champions, but their glory days are well behind them. Again, like Stuttgart, they've garnered a bit of a reputation as a yo-yo club. They then sort of haven't really troubled the top six in a long time. They did get Europa League a few seasons back, but apart from that, they've either been in the Bundesliga 2 or in relegation scraps and narrowly avoiding relegation. So there you go. Last piece of major silverware for Köln was a 1-0 win over Fortuna Köln in the 1983 Pokal final. They won the Pokal. We're now going to move on to Arminia Bielefeld. We now move on to Arminia Bielefeld, and their last piece of silverware came this year when they lifted the Bundesliga 2 title and got promoted to the Bundesliga. Arminia Bielefeld haven't won any major pieces of silverware in their history, so that's why I am counting this Bundesliga 2 title. So it was a pretty impressive year for Bielefeld back in the Bundesliga. They did well in the Bundesliga too. They never really looked threatened at the top once it got past the midway point in the season. They were comfortable for most of the time. Well deserved. They've got back into the Bundesliga. They're sitting precariously in 16th. But I think Arminia Bielefeld will have enough to stay up. So there we go. That was Arminia Bielefeld. The last piece of silverware. The Bundesliga 2 title. We now move on to Mainz. And we now move on to Mainz, and their last piece of silverware came in 1982 when they won the German Amateur Championship. So Mainz have never won a major piece of silverware, so that's why I'm counting that. They don't have much at all, Mainz, in the trophy cabinet. They don't even have regional cup wins under their belt, so have to go all the way back to 1982 and the German Amateur Championship, which is a competition run by the DFB for the amateur teams in Germany, so basically anybody below the second division at that point in time went into this and they played similar to the national championship system in the 30s when Hertha won it. This was for amateur teams and Mainz won. I couldn't find much information on it apart from they won it in 1982. So there you go. That's what Mainz won. They've not, like I'm saying, they've not won much. They won that in 1982. We now move on to our last team, Schalke. Last but not least, we move on to Schalke. Their last piece of major silverware came in 2011 when they won the DFB Pokal by smashing Duisburg 5-0 in the final. So this was back when Schalke had a very impressive young side, including a certain Manuel Neuer between the sticks. Like I said, very impressive Schalke side. They got to the final, very impressive run. Duisburg, who weren't expected to get that far, got, I think, what everybody was expecting them to get. They got torn to shreds. Schalke outplayed them and smashed them 5-0 in the end. And there you go. Of course, we all know what's happening to Schalke now. They are bottom of the league. They're in a lot of financial turmoil. As much as I don't really like Schalke, it is sad to see a big club going down the Swanee. So there you go. That was Schalke's last piece of major silverware, humping Duisburg 5-0 in the final in 2011. We'll now move on to my outro. Guys, that brings my last time each Bundesliga club won silverware video to an end. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I thought it'd be something a bit different. If you want to see more content like this, please tell me in the comments. Any feedback's always appreciated. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. A lot of these videos, again, I say it every time, take a lot of research, especially Augsburg, like clubs like Augsburg and Mainz trying to find out what they've won was pretty fun, but there you go. I really did enjoy making this video. It was really interesting and a bit of a nostalgia trip for some of the old games as well. Like I said, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you keep enjoying this sort of content. Remember to leave a like if you did enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new to the channel, it would be much appreciated. I do loads of unique footballing content over here, and put in the comments, were you shocked at what your club last won, if you do support a Bundesliga club, because that would be great to see you guys get engaged more. But like I said, remember to like if you're enjoying this content, smash that subscribe button if you're new, and I will see you all very soon. Jack out.